from Heather Dion, who is the Executive Director for CASA, which is appointed special advocate, and they are basically put in place by judges to become caseworkers to help children that have been displaced or taken out of the home or in a neglect situation. And so we get to learn more about what she does and their organization. Thank you.
Hi everyone, thanks for your time today. Like Amber said, my name is Heather Dion. I'm the Executive Director of CASA of Central Oregon. And I know sorry, that was louder than I expected. And I know I spoke to you guys about a year ago, and so if you're thinking, we've heard this before, I am going to repeat some of the same things I said because they're important, but I'm also going to share a little bit of different information. So hopefully it will be interesting and relevant to you all. So, like Amber said, CASA of Central Oregon, we are a nonprofit organization that serves Crook, Deschutes, and Jefferson counties. And our mission statement is that we recruit, train, and support volunteers to serve as court-appointed special advocates, or CASAs, who advocate for the best interests of abused and neglected children in the court system. CASA volunteers work within the courts in collaboration with key agencies, legal counsel, community resources to ensure that every child in foster care in Central Oregon can transition to a safe and permanent home. And so what that looks like, and so you hear a lot about the word court. And if you're not that familiar with the dependency system and the way foster care works, and I hope you're not, what that means is that when a child, so if somebody was a mandatory reporter or if you've been concerned about issues of child abuse, you might call the child abuse hotline. If anybody has any teachers or healthcare providers in their life, they may have done this. When there's a report of child abuse, the Oregon Department of Human Services will go out and they will investigate that report. If they determine that that child is in an imminent threat of harm, they will remove that child from their family and they'll go in front of a judge and they will say, Judge, we believe that this child is an imminent threat of harm, that their parents and caregivers cannot take care of them, and that the state of Oregon should become their custodian. And so that is how a child then comes into foster care. The judge agrees and says yes. That child is now a ward of the state of Oregon, and a judge is making the major decisions about their life, about to remove them from their parents, and then to return them back to their parents if and when it's safe, or if that can't happen for whatever reason, then to move them into a guardianship or adoption or another type of placement. The CASA program was started in the 1970s because there was a judge up in Seattle, Judge David Sukup, who recently passed away. And he was, so the story goes, he was going to make a determination like that. And he was going to decide whether or not to return a young child back to their parents, I believe it was a mother, or not. And he's looking around the courtroom making this decision. And he sees the state of Washington, their Department of Human Services. And he sees the parents, and he sees the parents' attorneys, and he sees the state's attorney. And he realized he is going to make a decision that is going to forever affect this child's life. This child will either be forever separated from their parents or go back to their parents. And he has no idea how the child feels about it and if it's in the child's best interest for this to happen. So that's how the CASA program was started, so that when judges can make those decisions that absolutely affect children for the rest of their lives, they have an independent community member who's not a caseworker, not an employee of the state, not affiliated with either parent, who can make recommendations so the judge is, when they are making these decisions that affect children, they understand how it affects the child and has the child's best interest in mind. So that's the very basis of what a CASA does. CASA, Court-Appointed Special Advocate. So we are special advocates for children in foster care. But you can't start working with kids in foster care and only talk to judges. You have to talk to the child, and you have to talk to everybody in the child's life. And you have to talk to, that's their parents, that's their foster parents, that's their teachers, their doctors. And so CASAs have the ability to do that so that we can make those kind of informed directions to the judge. But then that's also creating those relationships. And you are forming a bond with that child, and you are connecting with that child. And it really serves above and beyond simply court reporting into a really valuable relationship. So what we often say is that a CASA is an ordinary person who makes an extraordinary difference for a child in foster care. So I'm about to get really heavy here, so go with me on this one. So when a child comes into foster care, they have experienced profound abuse and neglect. So like I said, imminent threat of harm. That means if that child stays in that home, they are in imminent danger. So in order for that to happen, like I said, they've experienced significant abuse, whether that's physical abuse, sexual abuse, or profound neglect, as in their basic needs are not being met. Their caregivers are not safe, and they're not able to keep the child safe. And some of you folks may be familiar with a concept called the Adverse Childhood Experiences, or ACEs, if you're familiar with the ACEs score. So the Adverse Childhood Experiences is the number of essentially detrimental things that can happen to a child. And there have been some studies that have shown that adults who have issues with substance abuse or mental illness, or even just regular, or what we could term more medical issues like hypertension, obesity, diabetes, have a significant increase in the number of adverse childhood experiences that they experience as a child. So childhood trauma is connected to adulthood struggles, is essentially what that means. And so when we look at children in foster care nationally, they have an average ACEs score of 5.2 out of 10. So the national average is about 3. These are children who, when they come into foster care, they've experienced things like I said, the abuse and neglect that I talked about. They may have witnessed violence in the home, or violence against their caregivers, maybe one parent attacking the other parent. They may be familiar with suicide or suicide attempts by family members or caregivers. Caregivers who have substance abuse that impairs their ability to take care of children, mental health problems, or instability that impairs their ability to meet the child's needs, and then unstable housing and inconsistent access to food. These are often the kind of situations that are bringing children into foster care and that children have lived with for months or even years prior to their time in care. And these are the children who then, when a child is in care, when we have a CASA volunteer available, we will connect a CASA to a child or a sibling group so that that child can get to know either, one child or multiple children, and get to know them and become their expert and advocate in their life. And what that looks like here in Central Oregon in general, that's Crook, Deschutes, and Jefferson counties, is that right now there are about 324 children who have spent time in care. Over the course of the year, we'll have about 450. We're currently serving about 265 children with a CASA volunteer. Over the course of the year, we'll serve about 85% of children, which is great, and it's well above the state average, which I'm really proud of. However, that means currently there are 59 children who are waiting for a CASA, and those are the kids who keep me up at night. And in order to serve 100% of children, because I believe that all children deserve an advocate, we need about 50 additional CASA volunteers. Now, specifically what we're looking at here in Redmond is that right now there are 61 children in foster care. We're serving about 57 of them with a CASA volunteer, which is great, but we are still looking for volunteers so that we can serve 100% of children. One of the things that we've noticed, so this is children in foster care in Deschutes County, is that during the pandemic, the number of children in foster care increased here in Central Oregon, particularly here in Deschutes County. And we thought maybe it was pandemic related and things were going to fall off. No, things have not settled down. We are still looking at an increased number of kids in foster care. This is Oregon statewide average is going down. We're going up here in Central Oregon. And I think that, and so specifically, if you look up here, these are all children in foster care, and then that little orange dot up there is specifically kids from the Redmond area who are in foster care. And so last year we had 106 kids from Redmond who were in foster care, which is the highest number that I can remember in quite a while. And so far, as of today, so far for 2024, we've had 75 kids in care, which you can see is the same number as was in all of 2021. So we're on track to set a new record.
But is that partly because the population has been growing?
Partly because population is growing, yes, absolutely. So I don't have a specific answer to why. I think increase in population absolutely has something to do with it. We are looking at increased population here in Central Oregon. So obviously increased population has something to do with it. But it's a lot of the issues that you all are pretty familiar with. So issues of housing instability, issues of lack of mental health services, issues of substance abuse. We're absolutely seeing the increase of substance abuse and the impact of fentanyl bringing children into foster care. If there's fentanyl in a home, a child cannot be in a home. Fentanyl is just, it's incredibly toxic, and it's so toxic to children. Like I said, if there's anyone using fentanyl in the home, even if it's not the child's parents, the child cannot live there as long as there's fentanyl in the home. So that means if there's fentanyl in the home, the child is now in foster care or into another home. So that's likely has to do with the increase. So we are seeing this dramatic need, which is more children coming into care and then more children who deserve an advocate. And I often will show a video, and I don't believe I've showed this one. So this is a video kind of showing, I can talk about the CASA volunteer and how it helps children in foster care, or I can let you guys hear it and see it from one of our volunteers. And this is one of my very favorite stories that I get to share. Maybe.
First time I met Emma, she was in a stroller in the courthouse lobby. I was very nervous. I had just been sworn in as a CASA, and this was my very first case. After I read the case notes, there was a lot of fear of the unknown, and I was very nervous based on the phone call, how the mother was going to treat me. And I was like, oh no, maybe I'm in over my head, like maybe this is not what I should be doing. But when I saw her, all that fear went away and I knew, okay, yeah, this is it. And this is what I'm meant to do. I'm going to be sure this little girl is okay. And I did fall in love with her the minute I saw her, for sure. Emma's parents, when they were clean and sober, were great. They both really cared, but they just couldn't maintain. And at points they would be so aggressive towards me that it was fearful. And the judge had ordered me the ability to go in 24 hours a day because he wanted someone to be watching all the time. And I can't tell you how many times I drove by their house and I couldn't do it. And then other times I could. Definitely the case I've cried the most on. I've gotten tougher as the years have gone on, but lots of tears over this one because of the abuse of the parents of me. And then wondering, what she was enduring. Emma went back to her father's custody. Her mother was not allowed to be around. Then her mother came back in the picture, and that's when things started falling apart again. First I contacted the Hope Chest and got clothes, and I knew her favorite toy was Winnie the Pooh, and asked if they could find one of those. And then I just walked in with all of this stuff and she said, niece. And she knew me straight away. Every time she was moved foster homes, I would make a point to be there the next day. So she always knew that I knew where she was. At the hearing to terminate her parents' rights, I shared with the judge she has spent 34 of 63 months in substitute care, 45 months of her life in DH custody. She is now in her 4th foster home over the course of her life. She is a smart, beautiful, resilient little 5-year-old, but she lives with constant uncertainty. It is an honor for me to speak on her behalf as her CASA, but it is also heartbreaking to think that I, as her CASA, have been the most consistent person in her life and know the most about her history. The parents' rights were terminated and Emma was legally free to be adopted.
I was adopted when I was like 8, I think. And that was when she stopped being my CASA. But that does not stop any part of our relationship.
I had really prepared her for a formal ceremony, and she was waiting in the jury box with me. And Judge Forty, who'd been on her case the whole time, which was really significant, snuck out and said, "Who's this?" And I said, oh, Judge, this is Your Honor, this is my famous girl. And he said, and who are all these people? Because the courtroom was full of people. And she said, well, those are the people that love me. Like, confident.
I feel like Denise is a family member to me. She put like an amazing part in my life. It's like my life is a play, and she's like the director of it. And she totally pulls it together. 3 words. I love Denise.
And that video still makes me cry. So that young lady is, she's now 14, and we recently did a story with Central Oregon Daily, because Denise is now retired as a CASA after 14 years, and so they interviewed Emma, and so she was able to talk about it, and it was just, it's beautiful. I love that story. So she is a sassy, beautiful, very successful young 14-year-old. So a couple things in there that I want to point out about this, that what a CASA does. So Denise mentioned that she was the consistent person in the life. What we're looking at is when a child's in foster care, there's a lot of turnover in their life. The caseworkers change, they're moving to different foster homes, and the CASA, we want the CASA to be the consistent person. What we often say is that a child here in Central Oregon is in care for an average of 2 years. During that time, they'll have an average of 4 different caseworkers and live in an average of 3 different foster homes. We want them to have one CASA. And then the CASA is the expert in their life. They talk to their teachers, they talk to their doctors. They become that sort of that connecting piece, what she referred to as the director. And they're not the caseworker, they're not the foster parents, but they're the person who knows all the things, and so they can be the resource when that is that next caseworker. They often are calling the CASA and say, tell me about the case. Or when they are moving into that next resource home, the CASA's on the phone saying, all right, let me tell you about this kid that you're meeting. They're a really picky eater, and they love soccer, or whatever it is, whatever makes that child special. And so talking about the ACEs that I mentioned earlier, so all of those things that can happen to a child that can have that the trauma can have that long-term impact of them into adulthood. What also has been studied is what are the protective factors? So what are those things that when a child does experience the trauma, what are the things that individuals or communities can do to wrap around that child and to help them heal and to keep them from experiencing additional trauma? And that looks like a consistent, nurturing family that meets the child's basic needs. And family is a loose definition. The more I'm working in the child welfare space, I see family is biological, family is family friends, family can be aunts, uncles, cousins. It's for a child, anyone they consider family is family. Positive friendships. When a child has a strong social support network, that is absolutely a protective factor. Access to medical care, mental health services, and safe and stable housing, that's a community protective factors that can wrap around a family. After-school activities and access to high-quality preschool. And then caring adults outside of the family who can serve as mentors and role models. And so that's one of the things that CASAs do. Yes, we're reporting to the judge. Yes, we're the expert in the child. But then there's those relationships that are created. And when a child knows that they have a caring adult who is serving as a role model for them, that is a hard thing to measure, but it absolutely has a strong impact. And I share these because I know that as community leaders, you all are involved in a lot of different activities. And so when you are giving those, giving money for those bicycle helmets, or Little League coaching or whatever, that is absolutely a protective factor that helps children who have experienced trauma. So some national studies that have been done to show the impact of when a child has a CASA. When a child has a CASA, a child in foster care has a CASA compared to a child in foster care who doesn't. The child with a CASA is more likely to move into a safe and permanent home more quickly. During their time in care, they're more likely to succeed in school. That looks like their grades are better, and they're less likely to be expelled. They are less likely to re-enter foster care once they leave. So they go to a permanent home, that's much more likely to stay permanent. And during their time in care, they're more likely to receive the services that they need to heal and thrive. That's children who are more likely to be connected to medical services, dental services, mental health services, occupational therapy, physical therapy, all the things that these kiddos need to really heal from trauma and thrive. So if you're thinking to yourself, I'm inspired and I want to do something, there are several ways that you can get involved. One of them is, I was excited to be here today because our next volunteer training is here in Redmond, and we are absolutely looking for more CASA volunteers from Redmond. So what that looks like, so training, all of our CASA volunteers go through 40 hours of training. It's extensive training, I'm not going to lie, it's extensive classroom training. So it's 40 hours in the evenings, and then there's some homework on top of that. That's going to be here in Redmond, I believe at the Becky Johnson Center on Tuesday evenings from 5 to 8:30. After completing training, so there's a background check, there's training, all of our volunteers are sworn in as a circuit court judge, and then after that they're assigned to a child or sibling group, and typically we say it's about 10 to 15 hours a month, and we ask for a 2-year commitment because that's the average amount of time that a child's in foster care. It's very flexible to do around people who are working or people who like to travel. It's very flexible to do around that. So a lot of our volunteers have very active lives. We have an upcoming fundraiser, our Casablanca fundraiser. It's a silent auction and dinner, Old Hollywood theme. It's going to be May 18th in Bend. We are looking for community ambassadors up here in the Redmond area, and we currently don't have Redmond represented on our board of directors. So if anyone is interested in some board service or thinks they know of somebody who might be interested in board service, we are absolutely looking for a board member from Redmond. And then I also just encourage you to get involved with community partners that are serving children and families. So like I said, that can look like Little League coaching, that can look like getting involved in homeless services, which I know some of you are involved in. That can look like a variety of things, but all of those are absolutely helping vulnerable children here in Redmond. So I just want to say thank you and ask if there's any questions. Yes?
Do you have any idea how many of your, maybe you said this, that how many of your kids that you work with are homeless currently?
I don't know the exact amount, but there are quite a few who come from families with housing instability. Yeah. I would say, I don't know the exact number, but I would say easily probably 15% and likely more. Yeah. Housing instability is absolutely a common reason that, it's not the only reason a child will come into foster care, but it's such a cause of stress for a family that it will often exacerbate other issues.
You won't place a foster kid with foster parents that are homeless, I assume.
Well, so not necessarily. However, what will sometimes happen is children can be returned back to their parents. They're still considered in foster care, but they're in an in-home plan with parents who are maybe in a shelter or a transitional housing. So if the goal is to move them to more permanent housing, but they're in a fairly stable, safe place, sometimes that will happen where the children will still be living with their parents but still be considered in foster care.
Do you have any idea how much of that kind of stuff is going on in the Redmond area?
I don't have exact numbers, no, but I know that it's happening, yes. Yeah. It is, so I will say that removing children from their parents is the majority of the time inherently traumatic. And children love their parents regardless of the situation. So if possible, the state tries to keep the children with the parents, but in a safe environment. Yeah.
How do you get past HIPAA?
How do I get past HIPAA?
Yeah, I mean, you want us to go talk to, there are lots of people who they would say HIPAA's in the way.
We have a court order. So it's in Oregon state statute that CASAs can speak to doctors and can speak to therapists and mental health providers and teachers. And so we go in and we have a court order and we have a statement signed by a judge and we put it in front of the doctor. And then we adhere, also then the next step is we adhere to strict confidentiality guidelines. So CASAs cannot share information about their case and the things that they learn with folks who are not party to the case. But yeah, it's written in the state statutes that CASAs can talk to medical providers.
So I've always been attracted to wanting to be a CASA. Mm-hmm. What stops me is I'm just concerned if I have enough time to make the commitment. These are the years in retirement you need to get out and go somewhere. Yeah. So you have a lot of people who are in that boat?
We do. So the average age of our volunteer is 65. So we have volunteers who are in their 20s and we have volunteers who are in their 80s. But a lot of them have very active lives. And so the least flexible amount of time is the time in the training, because that's that classroom training. That's Tuesday nights. Like I said, our next training is 5 to 8:30. After that, it is typically, you're talking to caseworkers, you're meeting with the child, you're meeting with teachers, but you're scheduling that yourself around your own schedule. And then in the event, things that we can't schedule are things like court appearances. However, we have a staff of folks, and if a volunteer isn't able to attend, a staff member will attend in their place. So yeah, we have, I think right now I can think of we have a volunteer who's in Australia, we have a volunteer who's in South America, and I'm pretty sure there's 5 of them that are in Hawaii right now. And it's not a problem.
So do you do the boy children with the male and the girls with the woman?
Not necessarily.
That doesn't,
Yeah.
and do you have some kind of buddy system? I mean, you need to protect yourself too.
Yes. Yeah, so there's different ways that we can handle that, and it depends on the case and the child. And so, for example, some of our volunteers love to work with the babies, and others love to work with teens. And so we kind of will let them decide based on what's their sort of oftentimes more their age interest or the number of kids. If there is concern about sort of safety, we might encourage the volunteer to visit with the child maybe in their home, so that there's other people in the home, the resource parents, other kids, visit with the child at school, so maybe there's other people around, attend soccer games, all those kind of things. There's different ways of spending time with the child that aren't necessarily one-on-one. Yeah.
How many kids can a CASA represent at once?
Yeah, so all of our volunteers start with one case, and so that's a child or sibling group. So that's anywhere from 1 to 3 kids. Some cases have more than 3 kids, but sometimes we'll often pair CASAs on those. So typically 1 to 3. And then after 6 months, the CASA has the option to take additional cases. And so I think the most, Denise, who we did the video with, she was one of our super CASAs. I think at one point she had 4 cases at once and she had 10 kids. That's extreme. Most of the time it's just 2 or 3.
And do you ever, I can't imagine not getting attached.
Yeah.
So do you ever see a CASA step away and become a foster parent?
Occasionally, yes. The challenge of that is that when they become a foster parent, they're not the CASA anymore. And the CASA is a distinct but important role. So we often, as part of the training, we explain what the CASA role is, and if in the process of the training they go, actually my desire is to be a foster parent, then we encourage them to move in that direction. Yeah. And oftentimes, often, not always, a child in foster care, the state works pretty hard to try to find someone who the child knows and place them with a family friend or relative, that kind of thing. So if the child's with grandma, the CASA can be attached, but they can also see that the child is in a loving, safe place.
What is the waiting period for to get into a foster situation?
Well, if the child's in an imminent threat of harm, they become a ward of the state and are considered in foster care immediately. As far as, and like I said, the state will try to find somebody the child knows. So it might not be somebody who's a licensed foster parent, but it's maybe an aunt, uncle, grandparent, friend, who can become an emergency certified, is what it's called. In the event that that doesn't work and then they move into what's called a non-relative placement, that's what you think of as maybe more like your foster home. There are foster homes available right now. It's harder to place teens and kids who have some bigger behaviors. Kids who have experienced trauma can sometimes have some pretty challenging behaviors in a home environment, and they can be harder. There's not enough resource parents or foster parents in Central Oregon for teens and kids who need a little additional care. Yeah. So if anybody feels that compelled to do that, I can absolutely send you in that direction because the need is there. Yeah.
I just want to add, Alan was asking questions. I know a CASA person, and the information that person's been able to share with the foster family is amazing. It's Jill I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And I talked about her last night.
You did, and I told her, I was like, Jill, you came up at Kiwanis. Yeah.
She actually went to the school because there's a learning issue IEP, I think it's called. So she
Yep.
went to the school and got that all set up. And I think she's been back because we weren't happy with how it was going through the process. And so Jill is a go-getter. So Alan, since I've known you for so many years, I think you'd be perfect at that job. I really do. Because, and the kids it's just like you got family coming to see you. When Jill's coming, it's not like, oh, no, not Jill. I mean, it's there, and she's also helped an older one, which is now considered an adult, to continue his education. Because even after 18, there's still options in the state to help somebody through the process so they become a functioning adult and not on the system. So I'm amazed with CASA. It's amazing what Jill does. And the knowledge she has is amazing.
We also have a lot of husband-wife teams who do this work. And that's nice because I mentioned the confidentiality is important. So if you are a CASA and your spouse is not, you can't talk about the case with them. If you are both CASAs, then you can talk about the case. So we do have, if anyone's interested and they are interested in doing it with a partner, or we have friends who do it together, they can either be on 2 different cases, or sometimes if there's like a more complicated case or a case with multiple children, we'll put them on a case together. So that's an option. Yeah.
So if we're interested, let's say I'm interested, I talk Bevan, we go to those trainings.
Yes.
We still can decide at the end of the trainings whether we want to move forward now or wait till the time's right. So we wouldn't be taking up space if we did that. We're still only 30%.
No, not at all. So the way the process is, if you're interested, I would send you, so I have some flyers, or I would send you to our website, and there's a volunteer application, and that's the first part. So you'd fill out the application, and then we would have a conversation with you. And we would call it an interview, but it's more of a back and forth conversation. Answer any questions you have, ask some questions, and then you start training. And the whole training process, you can drop out at any time. So it's absolutely, there is, we can either say, hey, we think maybe what you're looking for is maybe more like being a resource parent, or feeling more like Big Brothers Big Sisters, other great programs. Or if you go, this isn't the right time, that can happen up until swearing in. And then even once swearing in happens, after that, typically we say within a year of being sworn in. After that, you start to forget some of the things, but typically within a year.
And then they'll have another training in another year. So if this year I'm not ready, next year
We
I
have
can
5
do it.
trainings a year.
Oh, 5.
So yeah, this one happens to be in Redmond. Our one's in the fall. We have 2 trainings that are scheduled. I think they're starting in September. One is in Bend and one is online over Zoom.
Heather, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for being here. Thank you for doing difficult but very important work. And this is for you from Kiwanis Club. It's made by a local artesian. So yeah, and so I think she's gonna probably take a picture of us.
Okay.
Yeah. Michelle's so good at reading clues.
With the camera right there. Very good. Yes. And in honor of Heather and the children she serves, children are great imitators, so give them something great to imitate. And with that,